sailor, what shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor early in the morning?
I'm Paul Bennett at Downeast Thunder Creations here in Millbridge, Maine. We're located along Maine's Bold Coast, not very far from the U.S.-Canadian border. What you're looking at here are the parts to an old antique spinning wheel. My daughter broke it, when she was about 2 years old. And she's graduating from college in just a couple of weeks, so that gives you an idea of how long it's been. And the parts were just thrown in a bag. And this all happened at my in-laws' house. This was part of a collection of family heirlooms. Well, I was going to fix it. Everything was put in a bag. My wife took it back home with us for me to fix. And that's when we lived on Cape Cod, and we've been living here in Maine for 17 years now. So it's about time I put this back together. It'll no longer have the same value as an antique that's never been repaired, never been broken, but as I said, it's a family heirloom, and so the value is not so much in terms of monetary value. It's an intrinsic value. I'm going to bring this back to my in-laws when we go to my daughter's graduation ceremony out in Ohio. We'll be going by way of my in-laws in Pennsylvania and staying with them, and I'd like to have this all together and bring it back to them. These spokes broke off. The ends are kind of rough, and it's hard to figure out which spoke goes where and if it matches up. And there's a slight angle on the end of these spokes where they go into this wheel. And there are a few pegs here and there, steel little pins. So I think the way I'm going to repair that is I'm going to take my Dremel tool, and I'm going to go on this hub here with this Dremel tool and grind away the rough edges sticking up from the dowels. Then I'll drill a hole, put in a steel pin, do the same on the other end after I sand these flush. Stick them on with a little bit of epoxy like so. And the taper, as long as I put the taper facing down, I should be good. And then I'm going to rough up the edges where they go in here on the inside of the wheel. And I'm going to use epoxy resin. So I'm hoping that'll work. It helps if I put on the right glasses. These here that I'm pointing to are nothing more than 1.5 inch long 4D bright finish nails. That's all. But they have a little bit of a head on them, and I want to use these as pins, so I have to cut the heads off. So I'll just take a pair of dikes, just snip the heads off, and now instead of finish nails they become pins. That's simple. And this is going to help me out by holding the spokes in place on the hub my glue them together, keep them rigid, and then once that sets up, I'll be able to set that hub with the spokes into the spinning wheel ring, or wheel itself. And I only needed 5, but I made a few extras because sometimes they fly off the table, you lose them. I'm now going to mix up some epoxy, and I'm not using a 5-minute epoxy, which is what I'd prefer to use here for such a small repair. I'm using Raka incorporated epoxy, and this is a slow hardener, but the slow hardener does not contain any amines, therefore there'll be no amine blush when it cures. But the only reason I'm really using it is because that's what I have on hand. I don't have any 5-minute epoxy. So part A and part B I'll mix together. And this is a 2-to-1 mix ratio. That is 2 parts resin to 1 part hardener. So get that measured out. And then before I add anything to this epoxy, I want to mix it thoroughly. You want to get the chemical reaction going, and you really have to mix this thoroughly, and then you can add the fillers. And you want to wear gloves. If you're using epoxy resin, this stuff is nasty. You don't want it getting into your skin. I'm going to thicken it with this milled fiber, and the milled fiber will give it an incredible amount of strength. It also thickens it and makes it easier to work with when I'm using it as a glue. So I might have to add more of this, I don't know, we'll see. And then I'm adding some micro balloons. Now the phenolic micro balloons are really not necessary. Usually you use these mixed in with the epoxy in order to give the epoxy a well, sort of a type of consistency that allows the epoxy to sand easily after it sets up. So you make a fairing compound with it. But the only reason I'm using it is because it's darker in color, and the dark color will blend in a little bit better. This is called an acid brush. They're very inexpensive. You can, buy a little bag of them for less than $1 usually. Is I'm going to take some of this thickened epoxy, and I'll be going around wiping stuff off later, but right now I want a little here. I'm going to put a little on the pin as well as at the base of the pin where it goes into the spindle. And then I want some on this end. On the end of the spoke. Let's see, that goes down. I'll just slide that on there. And I'm going to do that with all the rest of them. And I'm not really using a whole lot of epoxy. And where this is the slow hardener, I have all kinds of time to work with this. I'm not worried about it setting up on me. There we go. And what I'm going to do later is I'll take off what I can, but there'll still be some residual epoxy around there. And I'm going to take my Dremel tool with that tiny little bit, and I'll be able to remove it easily without doing any damage or removing any other material. And then I'm going to take a dark shoe polish and go over all the affected areas to help blend it all in. Okay. And I'm putting a little dab of epoxy on the ring itself, and then I'm going to put one on all the spokes. Because this is tapered, I think I can just pop it in there and set it in, maybe brace it up a little bit, and then just let it sit here until the epoxy sets up. I've got epoxy on the spindles all the way around. Let's see if we can make that fit into place. Whoa, look at that. Look at that. Well, I have to say that that is looking pretty nice. Now it doesn't matter if you're using a chip brush or one of these acid brushes. You're not going to reuse them. These are very cheap, so when you're done, you just throw it out, along with the mixing cup and everything. You really, once it's mixed, there's nothing you can do. You can't save it. You either use it or you toss it. And this is it. I'll come back later and check on it. Well, the epoxy is now set up. This is pretty much good and solid, and there's a few areas that have to be cleaned up from excess epoxy. A couple of drips I got here and there, but otherwise it doesn't look bad. At least this side there isn't much to clean up, but the other side where the epoxy had dripped, there's a lot more to clean up. As you can see, if I get in a little closer, there's some bobbles there, little humps that I have to get off. And there's some there. So there's a few places, but I think what I'm going to do is the bigger sections. I'm going to take this wood chisel, and I'll see if I can knock off this little bit here, where there's a little bit of a bubble, and the rest I'm going to try to take off with this little small ball cutting bit with the Dremel. Well, that looks pretty good. It cleaned up really well. And it doesn't look like there's going to be much involved in doing a little touch-up. I think I can touch that up to the point where you really won't notice any of this. That worked out really well. And the other side isn't much, but it's going to take a little bit more finesse and just being extra careful. Now that I have excess epoxy cleaned up, and it looks pretty good, except of course there's discoloration where I got down to bare wood, and little bits of epoxy showing. I found some dark walnut stain that I had kicking around, and I think I'm going to try that. I also have some ebony, but I think that might be ebony stain. I think that might be too dark. So let me try. I'm going to just see what this looks like. So this is just a test. So before I go any further, I'm just going to let that soak in for a moment, wipe it off, and see what it looks like. Actually, that looks pretty darn good. I think that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use this dark walnut stain, and I might have to touch it up again in a couple of places where a little bit of lightness shows through, but actually it doesn't look bad. I think I'm going to go with this. I think that will do the trick. So we'll do this side, and then of course when this is finished, I'll flip it over and do the other side, and maybe I can call this repair good. So I'm going to let that sit for a while and let it soak in before I wipe it off. And we should be good. So I have a lot more area to cover here where I have bare spots. So the other side came out really well, but there were only, the area that I covered was very small, so it blended in easily. I'm not so sure I'm going to have as much luck on this side, but we'll see. I'll try it. And I can still rub some other coatings on here to try to blend it in and make it look like it was originally. So I'm not out of all my options yet. It's just a matter of getting this done, getting it coated, letting it sit, wiping it down, and we'll see what it looks like. Okay, we'll call that good. Let me look around, make sure there's nothing else. Okay. Let's let her sit and soak in. Well, I'm all finished. I just have to let this wheel sit here and let the stain dry. It's going to take a little while for that. Of course, it's oil based and that does take time to set up. But it's fairly warm in the shop right now today, so it'll get a good chance to start drying, and I'll put it in a warmer place later tonight when the sun goes down, because this shop will get cold. But within a couple of days that stain will be fully dry. You'll be able to handle it without having anything come off in your hands. And I don't want to say it's good as new, because of course it's not, it's repaired. But some people might say it's better than new because, well, they didn't make epoxy back when this was originally made. And so it's actually a lot stronger than it was originally. Unless you look really, really close, you really can't see the repairs. So I'm very happy with it, and I hope that my mother-in-law is happy with it. We'll find out, because when we travel in a couple of weeks and drop in on them on our way to our daughter's graduation from college, I'll be able to present that to her. So thank you for watching.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor?